I'm sure, like me, that you have heard a lot about fake news since the American presidential election. And that attention to fake news is not totally unwarranted. For sure, algorithms are reshaping the way political information is communicated and messaged. Most of the information that you need to find to do what I do, background information, you can find online, so you're not talking to people and asking them a lot of questions because the information is there. And sometimes you're not actually ever talking to people because you're always looking at a computer screen. But fake news has emerged in that environment as something that is seen as a threat to electoral democracy. And the question I posed is it the biggest threat to democracy, or is it more a larger threat because of the context of what is happening to the media industry, or both? And I'm not going to answer the question to anyone's total satisfaction, including mine, tonight. So I'm going to give you first what I think is fake news. And for me, fake news is essentially the creation of an alternate reality through the fabrication or the distortion of facts, by and large. And keep in mind that I am not a university professor, but if you asked me, well, what's your definition of fake news, that would be it. And by that definition, I would also say that fake news have been around, and there are people my age in this room, for as long as we've been consuming news, and much longer than the social media era, and that those who led the fake news parade were not always, or were not only a bunch of nerds and potato couches hidden in a basement full of computers in some distant land far away. And all of the above, encouraged on all sides of the political spectrum by politicians, do more to the quality of national conversation than any amount of algorithm that sends you news that you want to read on your Facebook feed, frankly. Because the notion that it is easier to disperse fake news and harder to dispel them because voters get their information on Facebook or wherever, I have trouble with that. And I have trouble with that for two reasons. One, yes, fake news circulate more easily because of the social media, but so do rebuttals. They are not limited to the pages of a given newspaper that you subscribe to. So if you want to know that something was unreal, you can access the rebuttal more easily. But also, the fact that people get their information à la carte on Facebook, on the websites, is actually less likely to have them manipulated than when they treated the evening news like going to Mass on Sunday, which is what happened. So suppose you want to manipulate public opinion, and you're a government, any government. You tell me what is the easier proposition, to try to do it through social media and algorithms, or to whisper in the ear of a network that a lot of people watch and that journalists watch and take their cues from. I would argue it's a lot simpler to speak to the one person on a very influential network than to go through the social media cycle to try to spread fake news. So if fake news has become such an issue, despite the fact that propaganda, government spin, and all of the other ways to manipulate public opinion have been around for a long time, there are two other reasons, and they are not related to social media pipelines or to algorithms. And the first is what is happening to our media environment. There is a perception out there that the crisis that the mainstream media, legacy media, call it what you want, and it's not just the print media, but that the problem is that less people are reading or less people are engaged. Well, let me tell you that that is the opposite of reality. We have never had more readers. We have never had access to larger audiences. I used to write a column for Le Devoir, a small influential paper, as it used to be described in those days, that would be published on Mondays. On Mondays, Le Devoir in those days had a circulation of about 30,000. I'm on Twitter, where mostly I give links to my columns. When I put a link up to my column for my Twitter followers, I have 190,000 of them. The fact is that we have more readers or more people who are consuming the information that we provide, including on Facebook, because most of the content that is newsworthy on Facebook is provided by the mainstream media outlets than we've ever had. What we do not have is an economic model to replace the old one, where advertisers kind of provided a platform for me to write and pay my salary and for you to read for a very small price. And this absence of a platform means that the legacy media, which would be in this country the Globe and Mail, the Province, the Toronto Star, the CBC, well, except the CBC because it's government subsidized, but have at some point are running out of ways to pay for people to be journalists and running out of ways to pay for content. And as that content becomes rarer, you have more space for what you could call fake news and less space for actual content. That means that in the era of the social media, we also drink a lot of our own bathwater. We have these endless conversations that go on Twitter between us and them. It's fascinating. We're talking to each other all day. The problem is that when you look outside, and you look at serious people who are doing real jobs, suppose they're teaching or they're maintaining a road or they're driving an airplane, God forbid that they'd be reading Twitter as they do that, or any of those things, you look at them and most of the time they are not reading their Twitter feed if they have one. They're not on the social media. They're actually doing things that are productive to society. So while we're having these intense conversations all day long, the rest of the world continues to move on, and it's not having that conversation at all. Sometimes the conversation we're having is not even the conversation that anyone else is having. But it's very engaging to us because we're in the fishbowl. And with the social media, what we've done is we've turned the walls of the fishbowl, where it wasn't always terribly clean, the outside of the fishbowl, to see outside, but now we've turned them into mirrors. All of those new tools that we have isolated us and isolated Canada's politicians rather than improve the connection. I'm not saying that there are not efforts to change that. I am a fan of the town halls that Justin Trudeau does. Because as far as I can tell, he doesn't vet the people who come in the room, and it provides a reality check, not for the Prime Minister or his ministers. It provides a reality check for people like me, who get to listen to what people want to talk about as opposed to what we talk about. And I can't help but notice that the gap between the two, rather than narrowing, is expanding. And that does trouble me. And so when people tell me, you know, the voters are disengaged, they don't care anymore, they're not listening. Me, I fear more that we have a disconnected chattering class that includes the media that I'm a part of, and that we, the so-called chattering class, have lost thread of the national conversation because we are increasingly obsessed with micro events at the expense of the big picture. And that is a really dangerous trend that I hope we will counter. And I'm more concerned about the major reporting failure than about any amount of studies into fake news, because that failure is on me or on people like me, and it stems from this notion that if I don't spend time talking to people who matter in elections, that would be voters. I'm going to lose the thread of the conversation, and I'm not going to find that within the halls of Parliament. And I believe that in the American election, a lot of journalists, wherever they may have been, possibly for all kinds of reasons, not on the ground enough because of all the reasons I quoted above, missed the election and missed who the voters were that were going to vote for Donald Trump. And I don't believe that all those voters voted for Donald Trump just because some Russian somewhere fed their Facebook feed. Thank you.